When it comes to the First Amendment, I'm a fundamentalist. When it comes to prisons, I'm an abolitionist. When it comes to economics, I'm a socialist. And when it comes to government, I'm an anarchist. So, I'm many things and more than that.
60s leftist radical Bill Ayers today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson. Bill Ayers is a radical. That 5-word sentence is about all that many people know about Bill Ayers. When he was 24, he co-founded the group The Weather Underground, a radical group dedicated to overthrowing the U.S. government. Weather Underground members set off bombs at public buildings in Washington and elsewhere. The FBI labeled them domestic terrorists, and Bill Ayers himself became a fugitive for the better part of 10 years before the charges against him were dropped. When he reemerged, he became a community organizer and ultimately a professor at the University of Illinois in Chicago. Now, it was his casual connection with another Chicagoan who propelled Bill Ayers back into the public spotlight in 2008. The New York Times reported a tenuous and fleeting connection between Bill Ayers and Barack Obama early in Obama's political career. And when that story came out, Republican vice presidential nominee Sarah Palin went on the attack.
Our opponent is someone who sees America as imperfect enough to pal around with terrorists who targeted their own country.
Obama denounced Ayers and his radical past, and the episode was largely forgotten. Now, back in 2001, Bill Ayers had written a book about his fugitive days. In fact, he called his book Fugitive Days. In 2013, he wrote another book, this one called Public Enemy. And I had the chance to meet with him for a few minutes when his book tour brought him to Washington, D.C. one day in November of 2013. In just a moment, our conversation.
As the saying goes, if you haven't heard it, it's new to you. Here's an interview from the 30-year archive of radio personality, Bill Thompson. Enjoy.
So here now, from 2013, Bill Ayers.
I think what people are right about is that I am a radical. I can still consider myself a revolutionary. So in changing times and shifting circumstances and over a long life, but I'm still trying to fight for more democracy, more participation, more peace, more transparency. And it's the passions that ignited inside me and that led to commitments when I was 19 are the same commitments I have today. So people aren't wrong to say, look, he's a radical and he's not sorry he was a radical, and I'm not. The other thing that I think has happened is that the Weathermen, the Weather Underground, that whole moment is still very alive in this country because we've never resolved the Vietnam War. We've never had a process of truth and reconciliation, of truth-telling. And I don't mean by that achieving the final decision about Vietnam. What I mean is we've never gone through the process of trying to face one another and say what we understand to have happened. And that allows us to be living a delusional life. How could John McCain run for president as a war hero? There were no war heroes in that war. That was an invasion, an occupation, a genocidal war. The heroes were people like my brother who deserted and led that movement to Canada. That to me was heroism at a very difficult moment. So I think part of why Weather is alive, part of why I continue to kind of be thrown up, and it's not one-sided. I mean, you may see one side of it. I get thrown into this kind of conversation because we have not faced the Vietnam War in an honest way. We haven't faced the Black Freedom Movement in an honest way. When we do, I'm confident that while I didn't do everything right, I did a lot wrong, I'm absolutely confident that I would be happy to stand on a stage with anybody else over 55 and say what I did, what I'm sorry about, what I think I would do differently, and so on.
But it's a lot easier for politicians and the news people who have to write about them to just shorthand you as, oh, he's that unrepentant terrorist guy.
Yeah, I think that's part of it, but I think it's also interesting that my students shorthand me in a different way. They would say the old professor, you know? I mean, we do this to one another, and frankly, as an educator, I've spent most of my adult life resisting the kind of labeling that is a toxic habit in most of our schools. And I resist the labels of BD, LD, EMH when it's applied to kids, but I also resist the labels that are applied to me and to everybody else. So when somebody says, you're a radical, I want to say, yeah, I'm a radical in the sense that I want to go to the root of things. But when it comes to the First Amendment, I'm a fundamentalist. When it comes to prisons, I'm an abolitionist. When it comes to economics, I'm a socialist. And when it comes to government, I'm an anarchist. So, I'm many things and more than that. So I don't want to sum myself up, and I don't want to fall into the glib, easy summing up of other people either.
So much better that you've written an entire book about it. In fact, this coupled with Fugitive Days, I would guess, kind of presents a pretty full picture, don't you think, of those years?
Well, to me it does, but remember, it's a memoir, and some people pick up my work because they know a fraction of my history, and they think that I must have written a manifesto. I didn't write a manifesto, and it shouldn't be read as a manifesto. I didn't write a history. It's not the truth of what happened or the facts of what happened. It's a memory book. It's a book based on taking this character, Bill Ayers, setting him down in a landscape, and without benefit of hindsight, seeing how he makes decisions. But I know one of the funny, tricky things about memoir, of course, it's a naturally narcissistic form, but one of the funniest things about writing memoir is that I've never read aloud from this book or the earlier book where I haven't had somebody take issue with something or another. And the best example is my younger brother, Rick, who was with me for several years underground, for a decade underground. And when Rick read the draft of Fugitive Days, he called me and he said, man, you've got so much wrong in there. And I mean, we're very close. And I thought, oh my God, what? I said, what's wrong, for example? He said, well, the first place, you portray Mom as just a wonderful person. Mom was a bitch. And I'm like, holy cow, if I got that wrong. But you see, that's an example of, it's an interpretive work. I mean, to me, Mom was a wonderful person. To him, she was some kind of a witch, but I didn't see her that way.
Well, any child psychiatrist will tell you that children in the same family all have different parents.
And different siblings. I mean, the whole story of family life is Rashomon, but that's also the story of our lives in general. So the idea that I could get it right, I'll give you an example from Public Enemy. I describe one of my office mates being a Democratic Party activist and coming into my office and always squabbling about the problems in the Democratic Party. And I'm always amused by it, and I say, I'm glad I'm not a Democrat. But I say in the book that my friend Espy and her daughter were hardcore for Hillary, while her husband and son-in-law were equally strong for Obama. I read the book aloud a few weeks ago in L.A., and it turned out Espy's daughter was in the audience. She came up to me and said, Bill, that's wrong. I wasn't for Hillary. I was for Obama as well. So I took the book and crossed out that passage and gave it to her. She is the only accurate book on that question.
All right, but again, coming back to what you said a moment ago, it is a memoir. I mean, these are your perceptions filtered through your eyes. I mean, and nobody else's, but that's why it's so important, I've discovered over the years, to read as broadly as you can about any period of time, because the only way you're going to be able to get to what anybody can call the truth is by triangulating from everybody's point of view.
Without a doubt. I mean, I think you want to get. I think memoir is a marvelous form. It's filled with potential dangers, but I think it's a marvelous form to see how one person experienced a set of circumstances not of their choosing. And you're right, I would read lots of memoir, but let's push it further than that. I would read a lot of fiction. I think it's great to read history, but my insights about, for example, the Holocaust, and I was a pretty serious student of the Holocaust, but my insights about the Holocaust were amplified when I read Art Spiegelman. I didn't know there was more to know. Spiegelman blew my mind with his graphic memoir, Mouse. I mean, suddenly I saw it differently. Or recently I read Russell Banks' account of John Brown, his marvelous novel called Cloud Splitter, and I had a different perception about abolitionism than I've ever had. So yes, we should read a range of sources, and we should also read as skeptics, not as credulous believers. And that's true whether you're reading a history or a book on science or a fiction or a memoir. You read with a certain amount of skepticism because it's not the truth, it's an utterance in a conversation. And I'd much rather see it that way.
You had some difficulty with Fugitive Days. With, again, the timing was probably not ideal, with the bookstores deciding whether they wanted to cancel your appearance or not, and there was some difficulty. Have you had any difficulty at all with Public Enemy?
Well, let me correct one thing. Okay. The interesting thing about Fugitive Days is that I was canceled at 4 universities and 2 humanities festivals. I was not canceled at a single independent bookstore. And I think it's an important distinction because from my point of view, independent bookstores are one of the heroic bastions fighting to create the public space where the public space is being eroded. So I had no trouble in independent bookstores. In fact, after 9/11, the fascinating thing was I had huge crowds in independent bookstores, bigger than the stores could handle, not because people were coming out to support me or my book, but they were coming in the wake of 9/11 to find a public space to discuss public politics. I think that's marvelous. But in terms of this book, it's been a very different launch, of course, because we are now way, way, way beyond 9/11. And after 9/11, there was a moment of great openness. Even as the noisy, loud, powerful voices were telling us to shut up, there was an openness to the world, an openness to understanding where we are in the world. But since then, we've had a continuous state of war. We've had a financial crisis. We've had disillusionment with government and corporations. We've had Edward Snowden, another American dissident and an American hero. We've had Glenn Greenwald and Chelsea Manning, and on and on. I could go on. But we are now 15 years beyond. And so people are looking at the world again with a kind of openness and skepticism that I think is healthy.
After this short break, Bill Ayers talks about whether you could even hide out for 10 years these days.
You know, AI is not just for 22-year-old coders. A lot of us older adults are drawing on our life experience to find unique and creative ways to use AI, at home or at work. Got an AI success story you'd like to share? Tap the link below to visit our YouTube channel, AI After 40, and let's keep learning together.
Now back to my 2013 conversation with Bill Ayers.
Is there any modern tool of technology you wish you'd had 40-some years ago?
Well, I mean, I love all the modern tools of technology. The problem I have with them is that I'm clearly a digital immigrant. I speak with a thick accent, and my children are all digital natives. So, you know, the weird thing, we were talking a little earlier, but every time I say to I can't ask a single question to one of my three sons that they don't say, you can Google that. So I can ask them the name of a baseball player or the year that the Bears won the Super Bowl or the name of an actor in a movie. And they always say, you can Google that. Why don't you just tell me, God damn it, or you Google it? But anyway, I love that phrase, you can Google that. And I use some of the language without actually knowing what it means. So somebody took my picture last night at a bookstore and I said, tag me on Facebook. I don't know what the fuck that means, but it sounded knowledgeable, I think. Who knows?
Because I couldn't help wondering, I mean, with security cameras everywhere, with everybody's got a camera on their cell phone or post everything to the internet, could you hide out for 10 years these days?
You know, I think you could, although I'll tell you a couple funny stories. You know, one of the things I think is interesting is when you and I were kids, and you're much younger than I am, but when you were a kid as well, 1984 was a theory and a possibility. 1984 is a reality. We are all under surveillance all the time, and we know it. And the interesting thing is, the thing I love about Edward Snowden and Chelsea Manning and the rest of Anonymous and all these folks is that they don't represent the end of that surveillance, but what they represent is us watching them watch us. I think that's worth something. I don't have any idea. I've never been a tactician, and I have no idea how one would do anything like what we did. But I'm absolutely confident that people will figure out what needs to be done in the struggle for justice, the struggle for peace. The other night at a bookstore, I was doing a lot of question and answer. The very last question came from an anarchist dressed in black, tattooed and pierced. And he said, some of us feel that we might be underground one of these days. Do you have any advice for how we should prepare? And I said, hydrate and take vitamin C. I know nothing beyond that. You know, I mean, how does one prepare for something like that? But what I am confident about is the injustices, the endless war, the down pressing of people's lives. All of this leads to a necessary reaction. And I'll tell you, there's no way to predict, I'm neither an optimist nor a pessimist because I don't know how things are going to go. But I see rumblings all the time of people pushing back against the destruction of the planet. And it could spring off in China, it could spring off in India or El Salvador or Oakland. I don't know. But I'm pretty confident that people are not going to allow the planet to be destroyed in the interest of, disaster capitalism without a pushback. And I think when that pushback comes, let's all be together. We'll figure out tactically what to do with each other.
So why aren't you more pessimistic? I mean, it seems after all these decades, that the struggle just goes on and on and on.
Well, I think that's the nature of life. The struggle does go on and on and on. And I don't expect anyone should think that we'll reach a point where we can all sit in our armchairs and watch the world go by. I'm not a pessimist because I can't predict what's going to happen. Or another way to say it is, I'm a pessimist of the head and an optimist of the heart. But the way I prefer to think about it is that I'm a hopeful person. That is, since I don't know what's going to happen, optimists are sure they know, pessimists are sure they know. Since I don't know, I choose to get up every morning and be hopeful that today we can rally and pull ourselves together and make good things happen. But there's no way to know. And it's very easy to look quickly at history and see that this makes sense as an approach to life in two ways. One is, the day before Occupy happened, you didn't predict it and I didn't predict it. And had somebody come to me and said, here's what we're planning, a little tent city around Wall Street, I would have said, you're out of your mind. What are you talking about? But goddamn, they did it. It changed the frame of the discussion. People could say it was a failure. It wasn't a failure. It was a tent city. It wasn't intending to take power, but it was a very exciting moment of changing the frame of the discussion and unleashing a lot of energy where every grievance could come into the public square. The day before Rosa Parks sat down, we couldn't have predicted it. In fact, she tried to get arrested 2 times before that. But what made it come together and happen? I don't know. But I do know that hopefulness is the only way to live a life with your chin up. And what I mean by that is, I have a T-shirt that says depressed, ? And on the back it says, maybe it's political. And I do believe that cynicism, passivity, pessimism, the great antidote to that is to stand up and do something. When you do something, you feel the power of other people. You feel the possibility that we could be different than we are. And I have moments all the time that I savor where people stood up and did something and changed the face of the world. I think we can do it. I don't know that we will, but I hope we will. I intend to be there a few more years. I'll be in a walker, but I told these young anarchists the other night, save a space for me on the barricade. I'll bring my walker right up and be right there.
Unless you know something I don't know, you look 25 years younger than me.
I love it, brother. Thank you so much. But that's why, you and I both have faces made for radio. But I don't look 25 years younger. I'm almost 70. But I think I do get a lot of energy from. I've never really lived in an age ghetto. I really think that you get energy when you live across generations. And being a teacher my whole life, I've always had the great benefit of being with young people, and I draw a lot of energy from that.
But always remember, no more corn.
No more corn. Should I reference that? Okay. The truth. One time I was doing a Q&A, a question and answer in Greenwich Village around the film The Weather Underground. And one of the questions that was asked by a young woman was, what was it like for your children growing up with you as weird parents? And my son Chesa, who's now 33, was with me, and he stood up and answered the question. He started by saying, what was it like for you to be raised by your weird parents? And his point was, nobody chooses their parents. We are all thrust into the world. You don't choose your moment in the sun, your race, your gender. You don't choose anything. Well, you can choose your gender now, but I'm just saying you're thrust. Yeah, you're thrust into the world. And Chesa went on to say, nobody chose. You didn't choose your weird religion or the visits to Uncle Bob or whatever you did. His point was, what kids want is to be loved and cared for and recognized for who they are. They got all that plus, but they did live in a political household, and there's a lot of examples of it, but the one you're referring to is I was swimming with my oldest son, Zaid. He was 2 years old, and he'd been at Aquatots, and we came out of the YMCA near Times Square, New York, just as a huge demonstration was rushing past, and I'm kind of genetically programmed to join demonstrations. So I put Zaid on my shoulders, and we raced along with the demonstrators, and it was a group of feminists, and they were chanting, "No more porn, no more porn," as we marched towards Times Square. He got hungry, so we stopped at a pizza parlor, and as we settled into the booth, he turned to me and said, "That was really fun. Why don't we want more corn?" And so, while it's a wonderful misinterpretation on one level, he got the gist of it anyway. He got the gist that people have a right to stand up and chant. From the time he was born, we were at peace rallies and anti-nuclear rallies in Central Park. So our kids grew up with that. Did we force them to do any of that? Not really. But was that part of the culture they inherited? Yes. And all three of them are just lovely, lovely, lovely kids in their mid-30s now. I wouldn't say any of them are political in the way we were political. One is an artist, one is a teacher, one is a public defender. But they're doing good work and they're good people. And what else can you ask?
Bill Ayers will be 81 next month. He is now retired. You can get your copy of Public Enemy by Bill Ayers by tapping the link in our show notes, by clicking the link in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube, or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. Heardeverything.com is where you can also find my 2007 conversation with a member of the Weather Underground who was involved in that fatal bombing in New York City, Kathy Wilkerson.
There was a bombing a day going on. It was very, very common. The rage represented everybody, but that particular tactic, we couldn't go down that road with half-baked thoughts and romantic illusions.
And my 1993 conversation with the former chairwoman of the Black Panthers, Elaine Brown.
The person who shaped my political consciousness was a white man. And here I ended up a Black Panther. And they may seem a contradiction in terms, but when you know the rest of my life, you do know that it all makes sense.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And you can find us wherever you find podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, we'll talk to an Olympic skater turned children's book author, my 2012 conversation with Christy Yamaguchi.
I mean, it definitely was a lifetime ago. I feel like it's been 10 years, maybe.
Yeah.
10 years, 20 years. It's like, I can't be that old yet, really? I was just a toddler at the Olympics.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.